can't say that I sympathize with sharks, but okay. All right, so an Umwelt. Now, the reason why I'm going there is how could you translate that knowledge into human culture? Different species, not species, we're all the same species, but different types of human. What is their worldview? How do they get shaped? What is their ecological niche? So we don't usually think of that, but again, the idea is that Western civilization doesn't teach us to do that or think in those terms. And ethnic studies does. So that German idea of Umwelt, similar to the African yoga postures of cobra, sphinx, cat and cow, lion pose, or the kung fu styles of monkey, tiger, snake, crane, mantis, dragon. The idea is that you are emulating the creature's vision and worldview and meditating on it. Like Bruce Lee talked about how kung fu was invented by a Chinese Buddhist nun, who basically noticed how a snake and a crane were fighting and adapted their fighting styles to kung fu. Because a woman's strength basically runs in different directions than a man's strength does, and so to be successful, a woman practicing kung fu has to be faster, more relaxed, because that's where your power comes from, not brute strength in kung fu. I mean, Bruce Lee was not a big guy. But you could definitely recognize him as being fairly badass. Okay? So you take on the consciousness of the creature and adopt it as a worldview and fighting technique to understand or respond to an opponent.
Is this true?
Is this true? Yes, it's true. It's true. I'm describing the real things.
No, this is true for every
Every human being has the potential to do this because this was developed in response to human needs. But the idea is basically, essentially, by talking about this, I'm reintroducing the ancient African and also cross-cultural concepts that have been left out of Western civilization. They don't teach you to think like this. But this is where this came from. So, the educational system limits what you know to produce a certain effect. So you don't know about people around you, let alone what makes them or you healthy. So, pre-colonial societies educated people differently. Now, for those of you who took first term, we talked about this, but I'm going to review because not all of you did. Because it sets up part of what we'll be talking about in World War II and beyond. So, pre-dynastic education in Alkebulan, the age, grade, age set tribal system. Pre-dynastic means before the pyramids in Egypt. So the pyramids in Egypt, say, were created, say, 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. But you can't just create a pyramid. Let's say that there's at least 100 to 150,000 years of human culture before the pyramids. How are you going to create a pyramid city without space aliens? Okay? Without space aliens. How would humans do this if we did it? And I'm making the assumption that we did. We've taken the time to do it. Okay? what you need before you have cities is you're going to have villages of 250,000 people. We know that because early Europeans in the 17th century found this in the 1600s. Black Africans living along a river in a village in cities of like 250,000 people. So what does that look like? How do we do that? Yeah, it looks like Eugene. It's the size of Eugene, right? But you don't necessarily have roads, you don't have cars, you don't have electricity. Who takes out the garbage? Where do you pee and poop? How do you know not to pee and poop in other people's drinking water, let alone your own? The reason I bring this up is this is what happened in London with the cholera epidemic. Cholera is always a result of people peeing and pooping in other people's drinking water and them getting sick from it. And we're talking London in the 19th century. So, wait, they don't know, Western civilization don't know how to prevent cholera? No, because they don't have a germ theory yet. Africans didn't develop cholera and they had figured out that, okay, you don't pee or poop in the drinking water, okay? That's like simple. 150,000 years ago. So let's see what else we can figure out how to do. All right? So, without a city, without organization. So, education system basically was held by the family group. So this is before the rise of city-states like Kemet or Egypt. So the educational system within the tribe. So starting at age 6 or 7. Now, we would think of this, okay, so in contemporary education, you take the age of the kid and you subtract 5 to get the grade. Right? So 6 or 7, this is like first grade, second grade. Right? This is what the kid has to know and is taught. Storytelling. So they're not just being told stories, they're actually having to be taught to tell stories. 2, repeat them back. Mental arithmetic. Community songs and dances. Biology. Botany. Herpetology, poisonous reptiles. 13 of the most deadly snakes on the planet are in Africa, roaming around. Black mambas, gaboon vipers, etc. Best to know the snake, how to detect the snake in the grass. At least 13. That's just the snakes. There's other poisonous things too. Scorpions, bees, Africanized honeybees, ticks, all kinds of stuff. Spiders, yeah, all kinds of stuff. So you better know in second grade, 6 or 7, you better know what's dangerous and not. Because you can't change it, right? And you can't keep the kid in the hut all day. Spiders are there. Right? Herpetology, poisonous reptiles, oratory and debate. Public speaking and debate, being able to argue towards a point. Gardening, animal husbandry, cooking, sewing.
Wait, what?
Gardening, how to take care of animals, domesticated animals. That's animal husbandry. That's not being a husband to a goat. That's all right. Look, if you've never heard, look, this is OSU used to be an agricultural school, right? How do you take care of domesticated animals? Like a cow. Like, for example, the African Cape buffalo had been in some societies used as a rotting animal and a war creature. How do you do that? Well, you raise it from a calf, and then it responds like a horse, and you don't want to get one of those things mad. Oh, but not if you're on the right side of them. It's like riding a rhino. Very tough skin, very fast, very massive creature. very formidable in battle. And they have horses too. Animal husbandry. How do you raise these horses? Cows, sheep, goats, all that stuff. Chickens, all that. Community relations. So all those your age were literally your brothers and sisters, no matter what your blood relation. So remember, this is 6 or 7 years old, but they have to know that. Imagine if Americans knew that. Yeah, right. Okay? When I was in elementary school in the 60s, we were being taught, well, we weren't being taught this in school, but my parents made me read the McGuffey Reader, okay, which was the standard British colonial textbook to basically inculcate, look, by 6th grade, in Thomas Jefferson's time, if you went to school, you should be able to speak, read, and write English, Latin, and Greek.
They taught the classics.
They taught the classics. You had to know that by 6th grade, let alone geography. Y'all are getting off light in whatever you're getting here. I'm just saying. I got it light compared to that.
Yeah, but when you know that stuff, then you have knowledge.
Right.
That's why John Adams was so astute.
So, grade B, age 13 to 18, the rites of passage age. So, person was required to learn extended family and tribal history, geography, names of neighboring states, and the states of relations with them, both your enemies and your allies. Also, weapons, hunting, rapid calculation, clearing land for planting, the nature of soil, so soil science, what kinds of soil grew what kind of plant best or not, military tactics, some tribes included women in military tactics, care and breeding of cattle, division of labor between sexes, bartering tactics, rules of good manners at home and abroad in different cultures or tribes, competitive sports. So one was to provide leadership to those below you in age and responsibility to those above you in age, and apprenticeship to craftspeople began at this age. So that you're learning a trade, an iron maker, a hunter.
So you automatically had a job.
Yeah.
As soon as you were
Right.
on your own.
And this is also true later in Europe, but remember we're talking about 150,000 years ago, before pyramids. This is what you needed about 10,000 years of doing this to be able to even build the pyramid. This is the basics. Okay? And this is done without an organized school system. No government at all, other than chiefs. So girls were introduced to womanhood roles at an earlier age with the same intellectual training as boys. History, geography, rapid calculation, poetry, music and dance, gardening, cooking, bartering, marketing, social relations with emphasis on good manners. Childcare, housekeeping, homemaking in an African sense is also meant being a desirable partner for whatever gender expression, because some tribal groups had 12 kinds of marriage. 12. Sexual education by older women in the art of exciting sexual intercourse, position variations, contraception, conscious conception. This is without barrier methods. Okay, you could have sex without a barrier method, not get pregnant, or choose to get pregnant. They taught that. That was part of, that's the worldview. Cleanliness in the relationship, do's and don'ts in intimate relations. That's part of the female training. Now, this is way beyond what we would think of normal in sex education. Okay? Based on all the other stuff that came behind it, too. So I'm saying this also to show you this was the level of education that the average slave brought to America. coming out of this system, because it wasn't interrupted until colonialism. Unbroken for 100,000 years to build the pyramids and then after. Age 19 to 28. This group C, is the first level of adulthood and the first line of community action. Members hunted, built the physical plant of the community, so, walls, houses, etc. Prepared fields for planting, that's mostly the men doing that. This group formed the various industrial craft guilds, secret societies, both spiritual and technological, so guarding cattle, maintaining roads and paths, policing and fighting forces. So women in fighting forces were drawn entirely from this grade C. Otherwise, women were wives responsible for running farms, men having cleared the fields, women ran the markets, hence the stress on arithmetic, visiting and care of the sick and aged, forming women's secret societies, which were social, political, and economic influences on society, and supreme arbiters in what transpired in the home. 29 to 40. So functionally not much difference between this group and group C, except that at age 36, exceptionally qualified members could be elected to the Council of Elders. So grade E, 40 plus, the Council of Elders. So in chiefless states, the role of elders was always advisory. They rarely met as a council unless something big came up. Technically, you could ignore the counsel of an elder in a dispute, but it would look bad if you did that. Ignoring the elder could be seen as ignoring the community itself. The exception would be if the elder had obviously rendered a bad decision, and it's the group that decides that, no, that ain't flying. In that case, it was not led up to the people in the dispute, but to the judgment of the assembled community, because basically many of these councils were large tribal councils. Okay, so the community was represented by the crowd assembled, who would indicate their approval or disapproval. Each family had its own elder. Each family policed itself, because each person was also expected to police themselves. You know how to act right. You had, if you have hung around old school African Americans, they talk about home training. You know how to act right. We didn't raise you like this. This is where that came from, that concept. Each family policed itself because each person was expected to police themselves, which would be less lenient because each family would also guard its honor and image. So before a complaint could reach the age grade council, it went to the family first. Elders only handled disputes that could not be handled at a lower level. So at a higher level, if you murder somebody, that's a decision for the larger council. Alright, so it was the basis for African democracy in chiefless societies before Egypt and other city-states in Africa and up to European colonization. So still is the basis for a number of traditional societies. So the point being with that, so Africa is a continent where the average inhabitant spoke or speaks a minimum of 3-5 languages or more. Some were literate. If they were people of the book, particularly the Abrahamic folks, so Arabic, Hebrew, or other Semitic languages like Aramaic or Amharic. So every adult practiced a trade or multiple trades, and every adult male and some females were warriors. So even if you were a slave, slaves were usually captives of war. Slavery was not a permanent condition. You were allowed to educate your way out of it. You could earn your way out of slavery. It was not permanent.
So like a punishment instead.
Well, basically, the way warfare was conducted, according to, this is from Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. So in order to describe the destruction of black civilization, he had to describe what it was before colonialism. This is part of what he was talking about. So he was saying the way warfare was done, you didn't necessarily want to kill your enemy, but if you did kill your enemy, the war proceeded until it was clear that one side had won or lost, and the war stopped, and then the losers were allowed to carry off their dead or wounded. And if you got left by your people, it's because your people thought, okay, you didn't fight well enough, or you were cowardice, or whatever. So those people became slaves. They're not raiding villages necessarily to get slaves, so they, not at that stage. So they're saying, look, if your folks left you on the field of battle, well, we'll take you in, but you're going to have to work for your freedom. So this system of democratic education was the basis for the city-states that followed it, as well as the Moorish Islamic civilization that partially inherited the technology of Egypt when Egypt fell to foreign colonization. So this is also, as well as city-states such as China, Japan, Polynesia, and other states and places that had trading relationships with Africa, including Turtle Island. Yeah.
And the Greeks got all of this from the Egyptians.
Yeah. Right. Right. The Greeks are basically saying we learned from the universities, and the only universities at the time were in Africa and Egypt.
Alexandria.
Right. Well, other places.
Oh, I know, but that was like the main one before it got burnt.
Well, that was basically after European invasion. So before it was even called Alexandria, it was something else.
They had the biggest library in the world.
Yeah.
Before the Romans burned it down.
So, today's rites of passage program, like we have at Lane, they're an attempt to recreate pre-colonial youth socialization using post-colonial ethnic studies and psychology, which, for example, recognizes racism as a mental illness, which is outside of the framework of Western civilization. So, as we were talking about the other day about health consequences of racism on African Americans, 300 years of slavery, followed by 100 years plus of legally enforced segregation. So the direct health consequences are tied to types 1 through 3 forms of racism, so overt and covert individual and institutional racism. Because the responses to racism in terms of health responses, disproportionate stress-related chronic diseases like tobacco and alcohol addiction, overeating, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer. So, for example, when I'm talking about cigarettes, black people being 13% of the population and smoking 35% of the cigarettes, and therefore 55% more likely to develop cancer. And usually that cancer doesn't get intervened with until it's untreatable. So there's no early intervention or prevention. So, for example, we saw in South Africa, there was no AIDS prevention for non-whites at all until the end of apartheid. So, cigarettes, for example, marketed to blacks are menthol, which are more addictive and more carcinogenic. So let's say that blacks are only 10% of the smoking deaths recorded in the year 2000. Then the following statement is an underestimate. More black people die every year from alcohol and tobacco, 60,000, than the Ku Klux Klan killed in lynchings in its history, 10,000. That's the year 2000. So in the year 2000, this is from the Surgeon General. To get on this list, a doctor had to sign cause of death. Those collected causes of death make the statistic. The total statistic was 750,000 people dying from tobacco as smokers. Let's say black people are 10% of that.
Heart disease is number 1. killer.
Yeah. But let's say black people were 10% of that from cancer, right? So that's 75,000.
That's why McDonald's is a major factor for killing people.
McDonald's is. So, more black people die every day from alcohol and tobacco than the Ku Klux Klan killed in lynchings in its history. And let's just say, so rather than getting lynched, we're killing ourselves through preventable lifestyle changes.
You can trace a lot of this to 300 years of disenfranchisement as well.
Mhm. So, cigarettes and alcohol are often drugs of choice for stress relief. So, mental health services are also not accessed as frequently by African Americans for a number of reasons. So, when black people are correctly diagnosed with any disease, it is usually at a later, more difficult stage to treat than whites, if it gets treated at all. This phenomenon is called health disparity. It's a form of institutional racism, type 6, socio-structural violence, in which, well, why wouldn't you make prevention services available to all and then target and market it so that people would access it just like you target and market menthol cigarettes? Why just let the drug dealers do the targeted marketing? Why doesn't the healthcare professionals do that? They don't necessarily. Health disparity. So, health disparity is a form of racism, type 6, socio-structural violence. Type 6 produces the largest numbers of negative health consequences, diseases, deaths, through the normal, seemingly benign structures and fallacies of society. Okay? So the reason it's called socio-structural violence is it's designed, not accidental. You don't need a conspiracy theory. You don't need a bunch of people sitting in a smoke-filled back room to pull off social structural violence. All you need is people socialized in the American educational system. That's all you need. And so when we looked at the whole crash issue, right, that didn't come out of Western civilization in particular. That's an analysis that came out of black psychology. All right, so as Martin Luther King pointed out, and notice that he pointed it out, not necessarily Marx, poverty is economic violence. It's also not an accident. Poor people are not just lazy. They're not lazy. The system is designed to create poor people. So a number of us, mental health practitioners, have basically decided that racism is a mental illness. Now, Judy Katz is a researcher and educator who identifies racism as a disease. Quote, a critical and pervasive form of mental illness, unquote. She goes on to say, racism has all the classic elements of destructive behavior, including acting out, denial of reality, projection, transference of blame, disassociation, and justification, all classic symptoms of schizophrenia and psychosis. One way this disease manifests is through the delusion of white superiority, and this is her writing, so she cites 6 studies dated from 1968 to 1972. This book came out in the mid-'80s. Yes.
She says it's a mental illness.
Yes.
But how is it like passed down generations and generations of people if it's a so-called mental illness. Unless it's like totally like, I don't know.
You're asking that question seriously, right? You want an answer, huh?
Yeah, because it's like, you know, sometimes there's some mental illnesses that are inherited through family. But then versus there's one person saying this to a group of people that has no relationship whatsoever and they all believe the same thing.
You look at all these symptoms, you add them up, and it describes Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, well, not just him.
I'm just using
I know, and then he gets a whole country that's clearly not related to him to believe exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of things. Racism is not stupid. You can have control of people. I mean, you talk about dogma. Dogma is belief plus illiteracy. So that's what happened with Hitler or with any racist.
Well, what happened with Hitler is he was had methamphetamine psychosis, you know, at the end.
But the methamphetamine would be amplifying something that's already there.
Yeah.
So to get to your question, all right? So when mental health practitioners, so this is not the position of the American Psychological Association, okay? So Judy Katz, I'm going to make a wild assumption, assume she's Jewish, just you know, I mean, University of Oklahoma Press, but okay, she's Jewish, all right? Have Jews experienced discrimination in America? Okay, so notice that both in case law and psychology, we do not start seeing people reacting to systemic discrimination until they enter college and start doing research. So it's women who start doing research on sexism and sexual assault, not men. Okay? It's people of color who start looking at the psychological aspects of racism, not white men. It's gay white men and or lesbians who start looking at sexual orientation issues, not heterosexual white men. Right? So crash, basically, if you understand, if you're above the line and you got privilege, you're not going to trip about that you got privilege because the system is designed to be invisible. And is more visible if you're targeted. So the targeted people are going to write about it, right? So my lineage, my degrees are in psychology. Father's a black psychiatrist. His homies are black psychiatrists. So they're the ones that have been trying to fight with APA about, okay, let's basically look at including racism as having some psychological or emotional impact. Some going as far as saying, look, racism is a mental illness. Now, I'm an addictions person, so I would say racism is also a co-occurring disorder. Which I'll explain what that is in a second. But APA doesn't want to look at racism as a mental illness because they say, and their argument is, it's so widespread, we'd have to say that society itself is crazy. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, duh. We can go there, that's cool. Yeah, if we just say that society is crazy, then, okay. Look, it's not that we're saying that Prozac is going to cure racism, okay? No, we're not saying that. But if you take the first step, like, all right, you already did for the gays and lesbians and trans people, you already created this category called gender identity dysphoria. That means you don't feel good about your gender identity. Well, why not have an ethnic identity dysphoria where, wow, I don't feel good about my ethnic identity and I have to feel like I'm constantly fighting against, you know, these negative things from society. Now, I don't want Prozac, but I might want to be able to talk with somebody about this. That's all. Charge my insurance. Say that the stuff that's happening to me at work is like causing me stress and giving me cancer and all that other kind of stuff, and I could be good.
did take that Prozac, it would be flatlining your emotions, you know. You'd rather probably take it in harsh doses.
Yeah, I'd be more down with pharmaceutical mescaline, but hey. Look, they give Rock Hudson LSD for his migraines. I think I could get some mescaline. I'm just saying. But,
It's part of your religion.
yeah. Anyway. So, when I say as an addictions person that racism is a co-occurring disorder, here's what that means. Okay? There are co-occurring disorder means that you have an addiction plus a mental illness, and they interact. It's not so much like a chicken and the egg thing, though we could make a case that if you take meth is like physiologically like brain cancer. It actually destroys brain tissue. It can make you crazy. So then the treatment protocol for people who are dual diagnosed, if they were on drugs, we take them off of the drugs and see if the mental illness persists. If the mental illness goes away, then it was the drug that caused it. We can make a case for that. If the mental illness persists, maybe it was there before they did the drug use and they start doing the drug to try and manage the mental illness. Either way, we could work with that, with either talk therapy or drug therapy or whatever. So again, even whether racism is a co-occurring disorder or a mental illness, let's say, okay, here's how we deal with mental illnesses, all right? So, acting out. Okay, you need to chill your role. You can't be calling people nigger in business suits in downtown Harlem. Or in Fred Meyer. Or in the classroom. Can't do that. I may have my opinion, but at least I know how to act in public. Right? So let's do normal, self-regulate, let's be adults. Denial of reality. Some people think that, oh, well, black people are drug users. That's why they're in jail. They're the criminals. That's why they're in jail. Well, let's look at the data. The data doesn't indicate that. But certain social practices do produce the fact that there are people, take for example, the Central Park 5. Y'all know about that? You really should watch public television. Because there's a movie about it. Just last night. Ken Burns did a documentary on the Central Park 5. Who the Central Park 5 were. This white woman jogger was jogging through Central Park and got attacked, got sexually assaulted. Clothes, when they found her, she was half conscious, nearly dying, almost bled out, only wearing a bra, all her clothes had been ripped off, her keys were gone. This one shoe was this way, another shoe was that way, etc., etc., etc. And who they fingered for it were 5 black teenagers who are nowhere near her. So when the police said, what do you know about the rape of the woman? They're going, rape of what woman? What are you talking about? Well, we know you were there. Wait, the other people have already, so they separated them all, and they said, okay, everybody else has ratted you out, so you might as well say something. So they all create each one of them creates a fabricated story under the influence of the police that doesn't match up. Doesn't even match up with the physical evidence.
Ken Burns, right?
Yeah, Ken Burns. Yeah, Central Park 5. You can actually Google it. Right? So so essentially what happened, so Ken Burns has made this documentary because they got let loose because one of them was in jail with a dude who actually did it.
Oh.
And he said, no, this isn't right that you're in jail for something I did that. And it turns out while the police were focused on these 5 kids that had nothing to do with it, this dude went on to kill other people and rape other people. Because the New York City Police Department and the city prosecutors did not follow the real evidence.
When was this?
This was like in the late 80s.
Oh, wow.
And so they did time, and they just got released earlier this century.
Even though they were in jail with the dude that was doing it.
One of them was in jail with a dude, and so that dude confessed to a district attorney who then vacated the entire case. Oh, against all of them. Well, one dude was in prison because some of them had gotten out, and one dude, because of his drug habit, committed another crime, so he was in prison, but he got a harder sentence because he was a sex offender from this other thing, from being falsely convicted behind this other thing.
Hey, did you read about the Scottsboro boys just got exonerated?
This is like the Scottsboro boys.
And this is 50,
Yeah. Right.
80 years later.
Right.
80 years later.
Scottsboro
Just last
boys
week.
happened in the 30s
Just
during
last
the
week.
Depression.
Just last
Same
week.
thing.
Just last week they got exonerated.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Are they still alive? Any of them? One. Okay. Right. Scottsboro boys is basically a similar case in the South, where it was 13 who basically were accused of raping this white woman with no physical evidence in a group in a rail car.
I still use that in my reaction to it.
Yeah.
Was a dude white that actually did the rape?
There
in
was
Central
no
Park?
rape.
No, I mean in Central Park.
He was Puerto Rican. And he confessed to it. So, he said, yeah, I beat her over the head with a stick, took her shoes off, threw one here, threw one there, had her Walkman, threw her Walkman away. See, the kids didn't even know about the Walkman. Right? So there are all these details that the guy knew.
And what made him decide to confess? Is he need to watch this?
Because he felt guilty about, this guy's in jail for something I did.
He felt guilt.
He felt guilt, yeah.
Wow.
This kid's life is ruined.
Or he wanted that credit.
No, I mean, he was going to die in jail anyway. Pretty much. Because they got convicted on murder and rape on him. Got nothing to lose. Yeah, definitely. But they could have caught him earlier rather than focusing on that. Point being, that was sociostructural violence. It's an act of racism that the New York City Police Department did not confess to any wrongdoing. The prosecutor refused to recant what she did. The mayor of New York said, oh, well, that wasn't a wrong thing that happened. I'm just, whatever. If Morgenthau is going to basically vacate the camp, I trust him, fine. Do you regret having done? No, I don't. Okay, wait, you railroaded these people without evidence. And one more thing, they did a rape kit on her. So they got DNA, and the DNA matched the dude that confessed.
But none of the guys.
None of the guys did, right?
God.
Right? So they got convicted on no evidence, right? So, right, because they're black teenagers, part of a group of 25 that was kind of loosely doing some other mischief and mayhem in the park, but not a rape. Right? So, racism is a mental illness. Right? Denial of reality, projection, transference of blame, disassociation, which means you're not connected to what's happening in your body, right? And justification, all classic symptoms of schizophrenia or psychosis, according to Western psychology. Racism looks like that. So, how would we basically look at a cure? Alright, so because people of color and women have had to develop their own models of what's healthy, especially in the face of culturally destructive systems, it's time to turn to some of them. So, one of the seminal 20th century black psychiatrists was Frantz Fanon. My man Fanon. So he was born in Martinique, which is a French West Indian colony, former colony, in 1925. He enlisted in the French Army in World War II. Studied medicine and psychiatry in Lyon. Became head of psychiatry in a French colonial hospital in Algeria. Now, he's the one that coined the term sociostructural violence. So, when I told you that types 1 through 6 came out of black psychology, and or case law. Straight up, that's where it came from. Different people developing different things within it. Right? Self-unknown. Sociostructural violence. So the basic idea about sociostructural violence is he points out we are conditioned to think of violence as an act between individuals, but not systems and institutions. He's saying systems and institutions can be violent because he saw this, being the head of psychiatry in the French colonial hospital. He quit because his psychiatric ethics clashed with those of the colonial powers who engaged in torture and psychic humiliation. Now, here's what he's doing. He's working in a mental hospital as a psychiatrist trained by the French. He's noticing that black patients and white patients with the same psychiatric diagnosis, the white people are getting talk therapy and drugs, the black people are getting torture. And no therapy at all. With the same diagnosis. Wait, why is that happening? What's the medical reason for that? I didn't learn this in Lyon. What's the medical justification? There ain't one. It's straight up racist, and it's Algeria.
What it is really colonialism. Because Algeria was a French colony.
Right.
And they mistreated people there.
Yes. So, as a result, he joined the Algerian independence movement after he quit. And they were successful. So, his first book, Black Skin, White Mask, which I first read at 13, was published in 52, basically describes psychic disfigurement caused by colonization. What does colonization do to the psyche of people of color?
Electricity treatment for
Hmm?
anger. Electricity treatment for anger.
Yeah.
You read-
Electroshock for your anger management. Oh, that's great.
You read that book by Albert Camus, The Stranger?
Yeah.
That is an indication of the situation at that time.
He learned in Lyon that the French invitation to assimilate was accompanied with degrading stereotypes and cultural assumptions of inferiority. Colonized person could never hope to be more than a second-class partial citizen in French society. So he studied European political and philosophical thought, including Marxism, historicism, phenomenology, psychoanalysis, surrealism, and from those forged a post-revolutionary, post-colonial humanism, turning the tools of the oppressor into the weapons of the oppressed. A strategy. In his second book, The Wretched of the Earth, he indicts the West for hypocrisy in regards to law and order, progress and discipline, revealing the everyday violence and injustice necessary to uphold law and order and progress. So progress does not come with advancement for all. It often enriches the few while impoverishing the many, even if it provides jobs, their spirits and their psyches are damaged. So even if they are educated to replicate the same inequities they are subject to. So when we talk about education often being a force for self-oppression, that's what he's describing. Right? And without the power or the ability to conceive of any way out of their problems based on the education, the status quo remains the same. Right? So that's why I spent a whole bunch of airtime saying, look, this is what was happening in the ancient world. And this is what gets left out here. So if you don't question that people can, from any place in society, can rise to the top or whatever, or be whatever they want to be, but the way that they can be that is by basically working against certain systemic oppression, which Western education doesn't acknowledge even exists. So knowledge by itself is not power. Okay? Vocabulary is more than just knowing words is knowing history and detecting duplicity. That is, oppression by confusion. Okay, they deliberately use doublespeak to confuse you. You say this, but you actually mean this, but is there a connection to reality? And also oppression by efficiency. Oh, let's not bring up those issues, those emotional issues. You just need to do your job. Get the job done. That's a form of oppression too. Mastery of language affords remarkable power, Frantz Fanon. So, this is a cover from his book, The Wretched of the Earth, Les Dames de la Terre. Colonization is not satisfied merely with holding a people in its grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. By a kind of perverted logic, it turns to the past of the oppressed people and distorts, disfigures, and destroys it. So colonization came from Cristobal Colon, thank you. Cristobal Colon is where we got the name for the word colonization and colony. This is Christopher Columbus's actual name. Cristobal Colon. The riches of the colony, both human and natural resources, are extracted from the colony and shipped to the colonizer, usually via slavery or similar economic form. To maintain the system without a dictator requires destroying any form of resistance in the indigenous culture so that they support doing it and essentially destroying themselves. Right? So when Fanon basically, when I take the concept that he says socio-structural violence, the Ku Klux Klan does not need to lynch black people, because if you can addict black people to alcohol and other drugs, you can kill them even more efficiently and make money from them before they die.
And it pacifies them.
And it pacifies them, because an addicted population is a controlled population. That's why they make sure that there's liquor stores. That's why they make sure that there's crack and heroin.
That's why the CIA might have invented crack.
That's not until 1990s. We'll jump ahead. Okay? So, they do this through missionaries, colonial schools. Curriculum are set up to reproduce the colonizing country as the norm to reproduce the indigenous. Right? So part of what ethnic studies does is we're trying to counter that narrative by saying, okay, there's another way of looking at things, another world itself is possible. So, just like certain cultural products were hijacked and commodified for a white audience, like gospel, rhythm and blues, rock and roll, reggae, also certain religion and certain forms of spirituality. So, it's not enough to say that white people steal our culture and they're crazy, okay? It's not enough to say that. It's necessary to see why they're crazy and what can be done first to restore your, and by extension, their health. So I'm not necessarily saying white people are crazy. I'm just saying the way that this system has been set up does not produce health. And they've been forced to do that, as well as people of color being forced to do it too. Right? Because we haven't been taught each other's history or how to get along. So we'll continue on later.
Definitely going to put that on my reading list.